All right. Well, we are a couple minutes in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric Helms. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Brinka, responsible for our global go-to-market for our customers and our partner ecosystem. We are not going to be discussing Brinka today at all, but just for background, for those of you that are not familiar with Brinka, we are a leading exposure management platform that unifies and correlates data across all attack surfaces, and then prioritizes exposures as part of an end-to-end automated solution to help you reduce risk. Today's session is going to be recorded. So at the end of the session, we are going to share both the recording as well as the exposure management playbook that we're going to review with all of the attendees. As we go through today, please, if you have questions, put your questions into the Q&A section of the screen here, and we will make sure to save some time at the end to go through as many of the questions as we can. Today, I am pleased to be joined by my esteemed colleagues, Ken Ricketts and Brad Hibbert, and I will ask each of them to go ahead and briefly introduce themselves. Ken, could you go first?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Eric. Ken Ricketts. I've been a two-time public company CISO. I've got a really fun mission right now. I'm a CISO in residence at Insight Partners, helping advise Insight and our incredible portfolio companies.
All righty. Thanks, Ken. And Brad?
Hi, Brad Hibbert. So I'm the CSO and Chief Operating Officer here at Brinka. I've been in the security space for well over 30 years in different market segments, primarily focusing all on security. So thanks for having me here today, Eric and team.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Brad. So today's discussion, if we get it right, it should be somewhat practical, a little bit opinionated, and hopefully it's at least grounded in real world experience with large enterprise globally. So we'll take a quick look at what we're going to cover today. We're going to start by looking at three of the major shifts that are shaping up for 2026 from the leading analysts, namely around AI, trust, and data confidence. And then we're going to walk through a practical five-step guide, an exposure management playbook, or a blueprint, if you will, to talk about how you can take advantage and operationalize these shifts. And then, as I mentioned previously, we will save some time at the end for some Q&A and some wrap-up. So before we jump into the discussion, let's go ahead and just get a little bit of feedback from our audience. So how would you describe the biggest gap in your exposure management program today? So no right answers, no wrong answers, probably a lot more answers that we could put on here.
I want an all of the above button.
And it's absolutely all of the above and more. All right. Give it just a second and we'll close and get a look at the results here. All righty. Owner 100%. Wow, I did not expect it to be 100% of the participants ownership gap. That's very, very interesting. Any thoughts there, guys?
I was going to mention I agree with Ken on the all of the above, Eric. But I know we're out talking to a number of clients, in Europe and in North America, and I think the big shift from reporting to remediation is probably a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
Many of the accounts we're talking to, finding the owner, friction between the security team and the remediation teams, has come up quite a bit in the last 6 months or so, I would say.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, Brad. All right, well, we'll get moving. So with that context, let's talk about where the industry is headed. So prediction number one is AI becomes practical, governed, and explainable. And maybe to kick it off, to steal a favorite quote here recently from Forrester, I think they said in 2026, AI will swap its tiara for a hard hat. And to me, I think that means that, the implication is the AI hype is certainly real, but starting to subside a little bit as AI takes deeper roots and becomes more practical, and therefore the focus is starting to shift a bit to governance and oversight, and definitely getting a measurable return on investment. Ken, or what's your take on this prediction from the analysts?
Yeah, no, I think this prediction's, extremely accurate. I was thinking about this percentage, maybe even too low.
Hmm.
I think every organization right now has, existential risk if they're not moving faster than ever before. I mean, historically, someone that's built and protected apps my whole career, historically, there's been a couple, two or three delivery centers we all went to build an application or an outcome for the organization. And now, really, teams have an unparalleled capability to build apps, unlock data, and empower their teams. And, I think as a practitioner, we have a unique moment in history where, we can be the wins in their sails for that transformation or the headwinds
Hmm.
to it. And, I think it's a really exciting time for what we do. And as an operator, there's no more important time for us to be good at our jobs.
Hmm. That's great. All right. Well, good feedback. So, I think this brings us directly to trust as we go to prediction number two. So trust becomes the new security metric. So this one I think is really interesting. And from my perspective and what I've seen a bit of, security is shifting from kind of the legacy controls in place more to confidence in decisions that need to be made, and the system behavior. And so when we look at, trust you know, across identity, data, AI. I think when you get into large organizations and automation starts to scale the risk, the loss of trust is potentially a new security failure. I mean, trust has become quite a key component here. Ken and Brad, what's your take?
Yeah, I can kick this one off, Ken, if you like, or
Thanks, Brad.
yeah, look, I think, and just on the previous slide, as you guys know, when we're talking to customers around the world, AI certainly comes up. It's one of the
Mm,
first things people ask about within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the conversations. But to your point, they want to know how you're going to be implementing AI, if it's going to be specific, explainable, and those sorts of things. And I think that kind of ties back to trust. I think, historically, when people look at these programs, security teams are measured on things like the number of vulnerabilities that they find, the number that they close, the risk score reduction. But when AI and some of these models come into play, leadership starts to ask a set of different questions. One is, if you're going to be increasing the velocity with automation and AI models, can you trust the underlying data that
mm,
these things rely on top of and run on top of, because they're going to be doing it faster. And then if you run these models, particularly the non-deterministic models, like, can you trust the model's output, right? And can you
mm,
understand why it's coming out with that output? And can we automate decisions safely based on that output? And so this is where you start to see that the data layer and the AI layer is kind of coming together, and really a convergence between sort of the curators or the data or the digital provenance, I guess, and the AI governance kind of coming together. And it's really about understanding, one, can you really believe that in the data integrity that these systems and these programs are built off on? Is the AI transparent and believable and understandable? And is the model behavior predictable? Like, if I give the model the same thing 100 times, will it have a predictable outcome? And if you can't explain why exposure matters, or why things should be fixed, um, particularly when AI is influencing those decisions, then trust breaks down. So I think that from a broad perspective, I think that certainly makes sense. And then I think, when you take a look at agentic AI, and I know I'm going to go off a little bit here, but I think this is one that's come up recently, Eric, is
mm.
when you take
Yeah.
a look at agentic AI, we came across a number of organizations who are struggling with specific things where AI is a great solution, right? It can
Mhm.
provide some great outcome. And one of those areas when you're missing information, like, I just mentioned this because I saw the slide earlier on ownership and ownership owners. Well, AI is a great way to kind of plug that hole. If you know you have this robust data set or exposure database with majority of the information filled out, but you're missing certain things, like maybe in 15% of the cases you're missing the ownership, the remediation owner, then AI can play a significant role there. Yeah, but the AI models aren't perfect. And so if you're going to use agentic AI to solve a specific challenge like that, you want to understand how much you can trust that model. And
Mhm.
so, when we do that, for example, it'll come out and say, well, the model is 90% sure that Brad is the owner, or it's 70% sure, or 50% sure. And so what program owners now want to do is they want to externalize that level of trust and the control of that trust to control their decision. So if it's 90%, then maybe they'll just pass off and start the remediation process. If it's 70%, they may want a human in the loop because they don't want to make
Mhm.
decisions, solely based on the model. And if it's 50%, they may pass it over to somebody to do some analysis with. So I do see this coming up both from a holistic perspective, but also on those specific use cases where people want to have visibility over how much they should trust those models if they're going to be basing decisions on them. So I know I went off a little bit there, but I think that's pretty interesting based on the outcome of that poll earlier in the call.
And if I could just add briefly, one, I really like those metrics. I was recently on a call with a fellow CISO, and he said, "Oh, in 2026, our AI governance committee not only is responsible for policy and compliance, but now they have dedicated resources that are driving outcomes." And I think that goes back to the first prediction. You're seeing, these outcomes get powered by real transformative change, not only with the technology we're using, but also organizational structure. We're hiring those heads of AI governance. We're empowering these committees. And then on the training note, as an operator, I'm a huge believer in if you can have short, sweet, effective training and really connect the dots and help people understand what are you protecting, why is it so important. It goes from just being, well, hey, I've got to get this done today for this project I'm working on, to no, I'm responsible for protecting our customers' data and helping our
Mhm.
organization be secure. And I'm really a big fan in AI training, short, easy to consume, effective, will help on that mission incredibly.
Great. Yeah, good, excellent feedback, I think, on both sides. So as we move to the next prediction, then I think what's interesting about trust is ultimately a lot of it depends on the confidence in the data itself. So that leads to prediction number three. Resilience will depend on data confidence, and I think we could probably all agree that data is really the foundation to an effective exposure management program, and data confidence is a key theme across AI and preemptive security. In my experience, there's no shortage of data, in the modern enterprise today. It's really trying to get to the actionable information and insights that matter, that truly makes the difference. So, what does data confidence, and from your gentleman's perspective, mean to the customer and or to the CISO community?
I'll lead off. And I think, if I was to vote in that poll, it would have been a lot of data, but not enough insights. And I think, if you look at what's being predicted as just an incredible amount of offensive AI attacks on organizations, like I'm very hopeful that AI powered blue teams are going to also meet the challenge that's ahead for us. But we've got to have confidence in the data. And large language models are uniquely good at processing unstructured text and unlocking data we've never had access to, which is an amazing, time for all of us in this profession. But we've got to be able to believe that we can count on it. It's got to be, machine speed, and that's something we can't just assume will work. We've got to have continued investment in that.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point as well, Eric, I think, we talk about exposure management programs. It is come down to the data, right? They're data-driven
Hmm.
programs, and you have to have strong data foundation that you can build off of. If you have that strong, data confidence, that's not just shared in the security team, but with the business owners and with the remediation teams, you can kind of drive down that friction that you sometimes see that slows down these programs. And on top of that data, to Ken's point, if you're doing it things at lightning speed and you're making decisions faster and you have all these models running, well, that works great if the models are accurate and it's running on the right data, right? So you're making the right decisions. So are you prioritizing the right exposures, and you're actually reducing risk? But if you're basing those decisions on wrong data, AI and automation is not going to fix bad data. It's going to amplify bad data, and it's going to get you doing the wrong things faster. And so from that
Hmm.
perspective, I totally agree that you need to have a strong confidence in the data that's really driving all of these other capabilities and augmentations that you add to the program.
Yeah, excellent viewpoints there from both. So, okay, well, so as we start to transition here from the predictions for 2026 and the playbook for 2026, I think it would just be interesting just to take a quick pause, and take a look at, what does the board and leadership, really care about? And I think that, this slide captures some of the really big questions that boards are asking their leadership. And Ken, as the CISO practitioner, probably nobody better on this group to address the slide here and some of your feedback.
No, I thank you. I think about this a lot. And, uniquely, CISOs get sold threats and risks, but we invest in maturity outcomes for the organization. So when we go to our exec team and our boards, I really like this framework to really help you think about up-leveling the conversation, not only when you're talking to a CISO, but also if you're a CISO on this call, thinking about, well, how do I up-level, the discussion with my board? Security teams are always, small but mighty teams, often cost centers. And really, if you can apprise them, like, the current investments we're making, are appropriate and what you'd expect. But based on these four categories, like our problems are constantly evolving. I think about, the type of nation state attacks and advanced threats. You may have an incredible set of security controls, and though if you're not thinking uniquely about those kind of attacks on your organization, you may not be picking the right fruit high enough in the tree. There's a lot of emerging risks that are happening all the time, and we don't have time to get smarter at that. We have to build a feedback loop and information system in our security program to adapt and evolve all the time. And then, when my security team comes to me and says, hey, Ken, we need this new solution, the number one question I ask is, is there something else that we can not spend on, and if we want to fund that project? And I think that's,
Mhm.
not that we don't all have, increasing budgets for security programs, which we all do. It's important and never more than before. But it's a really important thing we all think about, which is, how am I saving money as I'm making smart investments? And then the last but not least, when we think about governance compliance, there's a lot of, regulatory requirements comes with it. I've always looked at it as how do we unlock new verticals for the business? How do we help power the organization, and really be a growth driver? So I think, really to package this, I think if you're talking to a CISO or you're a CISO talking to a board, if you can up level the conversation and really think holistically about these categories, I think you're going to be able to drive outcomes for the org.
Mhm. Yeah, excellent feedback. Thank you, Ken. Okay, well, I think so. We've got the predictions and sort of what does the board care about and what you'd be considering. I think that sets the stage for talking about, essentially a practical blueprint. And so the 2026 exposure management blueprint, this is based on working and consulting with large, complex enterprises globally. And certainly this doesn't represent some sort of a rip and replace model or build from the ground up, but I think more of a framework for how you can mature, the existing tooling and processes that you already have in place. So as we go to the next slide, it all starts with visibility. And so step number one is to see the whole picture. And, this isn't about having a single source of truth. I think this is more about having a single story across many sources of data. And so, Brad, I know as we go through the playbook, I'll sort of turn to you here for your expert input on the playbook. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, and I think when you say see the whole picture, I think the first thing that we want to understand is what's the scope of the program. And for us, our recommendation, and love to get Ken's input on this, is the walk, crawl, run, sprint, right? So get the program up and running. Don't try to boil the ocean from day one. Focus on what's going to be the biggest impact to the business. Kind of work through the whole process. Kind of oil the machinery, if you will, across the different teams and the remediation teams and so on. And once you have success, then you can replicate that throughout the business and grow and mature that program over time. And so really it comes down to scope. And when you want to see that whole picture, you want to start with that scope. and start pulling information into it to an exposure profile that you can start. Again, it goes down to that core data that you can trust that we talked about earlier. You want to start building out that exposure profile, and typically when you do that, you're going to be pulling information from different sources and different assets and applications in cloud and potentially code and so forth, and pulling that into a central area. But it's really, as you say, not to get to that single source of truth. It's really to kind of get connectivity and start understanding the risk landscape, right? So start small, pull that information in, and start to normalize that. And if you have gaps in your coverage, then certainly you want to add some tooling or improve your visibility in certain areas. But it's really kind of starting with the baseline is the first step.
Yeah. And I was just very small grace note. I completely agree. I think it's not the most glamorous thing we do, but getting coverage for your entire organization and understanding your security coverage and your attack surface profile is the number one defense that we implement to help protect our organization. So big plus one.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Well, so once we can see everything, then I think, the next logical step here is that context matters. And so being able to
Yeah.
put the context or the risk in context. So Brad?
Yeah, and so here again, not every CV, again, as you know, is not the same. And so as you start to collect that exposure profile, you want to start pulling in more context to make things more relevant to the business. And so context here would be, environmental, understanding, right? So, um, whether you have assets that are on the externally facing, that could be a breach for an attack, what types of attack surfaces are on those assets as well. So services, ports, protocols, those sorts of things. You may not use those things initially. Again, you don't want to overcomplicate your program, but have this information for kind of downstream decision making in the future. Are things on then you want to start understanding it from a business context perspective as well. Is it a crown jewel? Is it on the production network? Is it on a test network? Does it have PII data, or is it related to some sort of compliance requirement? So you're really trying to get an understanding for both the criticality of the asset from a business perspective, but also kind of the environmental profile of those assets as well. And then from that, you can kind of create yourself what I would call as a base score. Now, some of this information might be from source systems. Again, typically exposure management programs are reaching out. As Ken mentioned, people have lots of systems, lots of signals, lots of noise. So you're typically reaching out to existing infrastructure and investments that you've made and pulling that information back. And sometimes, the asset database will have some of this information. Sometimes your ticketing system might have some information. Sometimes your management systems will have some of this information. And sometimes you have to calculate that yourself. So you really want to start understanding where you can get those sources of context and start to pull that in and really enrich that repository or that exposure profile that you're pulling together. Okay. And sometimes, sometimes when you do that and you create your risk priorities, this is as far as many organizations go as the first phase of their program. Kind of with this, they prioritize the risks. They take in consideration that context. They take in consideration the business context to make sure there's alignment there. And from that, then they'll push that off to the remediation team and start remediating. There is another step, more sophisticated step that we'll talk about in just a second we also recommend as we evolve the program.
Yeah, so you're sort of alluding that context alone just isn't enough, right? The relationships here also matter.
Yeah,
if we go to that,
right.
Step number 3 in the blueprint really is about connecting the dots. So what are we referring to here?
Yeah, so this is a number of things. So here, it's not just looking at the vulnerabilities and the assets on their own. You want to start mapping relationships between those things to see how they're related, how they can if they can reach one another. You want to start bringing in things like threat intelligence as well. Things like you might want to bring in exploitability indexes if certain CVEs are on, for example, on the known vulnerability lists. They've been exploited in the wild. You may want to start looking at convergence of risks, so not looking at every CVE independently, but look at concentration risks. You might want to bring in things like MITRE ATT&CK and MITRE DEFEND, so you can have more explainability downstream for the remediation teams and why you're prioritizing things. You may also want to start doing some things around attack path mapping to understand how these CVEs could be connected together from an attack path perspective. So you really want to start taking a step back and getting a better sort of situational awareness of everything kind of put together. And these things would typically be used to calibrate your prioritization and your risk scores as well, right? To kind of get a more of a refinement, if you will, to make sure you're really fixing those things that are exploitable and that would have a significant impact on the business.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah, and so
and I would
that,
just say,
oh, go ahead, Ken.
no, I just I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, as we talk about the playbook, we've gone from coverage to prioritization to really, deep contextual understanding. You know, our teams are inundated with alerts 24 by 7, and we need to be able to respond to the right alerts at the right time. And it's only through, th this kind of approach that you can get to that promised land.
Yeah, absolutely. And like so the with the correlation, I mean, this is where the insights happen, and the insights are really only valuable, right, if they ultimately lead to action. And so as we go to the step four
That's right.
in the blueprint, it's about getting the right fix to the right person ultimately at the right time, right, Brad? And in large automated
Yeah,
environments, that clarity is not always easy.
that's right, and that's why, again, if you trust the data and you're working with the other stakeholders right from the get-go, right? So they understand, you have a shared understanding of risk, you understand how the models are working, you can trust the models are working and kind of providing you the right recommendations. And once you have that, then the next thing is, you've prioritized the risks, you've recalibrated the risks based on some of those other things that we talked about. The next thing you want to do is start fixing those things, right? Again, the market's shifting from reporting to remediation, right? So action is certainly top of mind. And so here, again, you need to define who the owners are, right? You have to understand, who the owners of the risk are, but also you have to understand who the remediation owners are as well. And this is an area that does create friction with many teams as they start to scale their programs. And certainly, again, we have ways that we work on that and accommodate that, but that's certainly something that does come up. Once you understand that, the next thing you want to do is you want to bundle the information in a way that's most effective for those remediation teams. So don't just send them over a bunch of noise that, as Ken mentioned, people have too much noise. So understand the remediation teams and bundle and reduce the noise as much as you can. And so if I'm sending things to, and I don't, the remediation team is an application team, for example, they might want to bundle the actions into sprints so they can apply that within their development framework. If it's a network team, might want to bundle them by technology because different teams handle different technology. If it's a desktop team, I want to bundle them by action or by patch, for example. So you want to simplify the process and remove as much noise as you can as you pass it off to the remediation teams. You also want to add supporting information as well and evidence so they can believe and trust what you're sending them is appropriate, right? And so if you've done things like added MITRE, attack, and defend, and so on, start adding that information in there and the exploitability information in there so they can understand why they need to do these things, right? So as much supporting evidence that's required. Not too much that you're inundating people with too much information. And we kind of get into a little bit of that in the playbook, but with enough information that they know that they're doing the right thing and then push that out to the right system. So again, make things easy for the remediation teams. If it's the desktop teams, maybe it's going to ServiceNow. If it's a development team, it might be going to a certain instance of Jira, for example. So you want to push those tickets out to those familiar interfaces and processes that those teams are already engaging with to kind of keep the friction low as the process matures. Then lastly, you want to make sure you're getting, kind of that closed loop bi-directional synchronization. So as things are being fixed, you're marking that within the exposure profile as well. So you can see how long things took to fix and if they were within SLAs. And so you can measure these things on an ongoing basis as well. So again, a much more detail in the playbook, but a high level, that's kind of the
Yep.
process. And again, I'll see if Ken has any insights on that as well. And this is a friction point that we do see in a lot of programs where things start to stall out.
No, I think everything Brad said is spot on, and I think there's like to that friction point. When you're trying to unpack information in the middle of an incident, it's a challenge, and I think
Mhm.
one of the unique things back to where we started, trading my tiara for a hard hat. I think
Hmm.
AI is really going to help us unlock data, analyze those CVEs, open that Jira ticket,
100%.
connect that Slack workflow at a way we've never seen before. I'm very excited about the next chapter ahead for all of us in our security industry.
Yeah. Well, and like, look, the final step, which I think is also quite critical, is just making sure that leadership can understand and get behind this new initiative. And I think the step five here is to be able to tell the story, but in business terms. And I think as you alluded to earlier, Ken, executives and boards don't fund technologies and efforts, right? They're looking to fund outcomes. And so, Brad, you want to close out on the final step here?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. I'd love to get Gen's perspective. I think here you have to know your audience again, right? So you could be targeting the board, but you could also be targeting, business units or business owners, remediation teams, the one owning the exposure management program and so on. So, tailor things to the audience so they can understand and understand the story. The other thing is, I would just highlight one more thing here is highlight accountability. And so whether that's having compliance dashboards or SLA metrics, and as you know, Eric, we design a lot of these for customers, right? Sort of the naughty and nice list, right? To get
Hmm.
people to take action. And so I'm curious when Ken was kind of running these programs, if he used more of a carrot or a stick to kind of drive action on the remediation side.
No, it's a great point. And I think I've had the opportunity to really come to the realization that it's a lot better to be a security coach than a security cop. And I
Hmm.
think one of the ways that you do that, Brad, at scale is you build product and security scorecards and you operationalize those. And it's a really fun transformation as CISO to see, you go from having to stop every threat and risk in the organization to having people, knock on your door and be like, "Hey, CISO, I solved this risk today. Can you get me off this orange down to yellow or green?"
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
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 100%.
great.
yeah.
100%, absolutely. And then, where Eric started, I think if you're not talking in terms of outcomes, and I've worked with some of the, best peer executive leaders on the planet that have really helped me understand that. And especially CIOs are uniquely better at this than CISOs, right? CIOs talk in business terms. They have just a wide array of challenges that they're driving, but they're always talking about how they're moving the business forward. And I would just say that's a key thing to keep forefront in everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Okay. Well, excellent conversation on the blueprint. So we ran a couple minutes over. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the group today to get everybody back to their next meeting. So just huge thank you for spending time in what is a busy week for most of us as many of you are getting ready to head out for the holiday period. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out both the recording and the exposure management playbook to all of the participants. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we strongly encourage you, reach out to myself, to Ken, to Brad on LinkedIn. We would love to engage. And then just finally from Brinka and from Insight Partners, we wish you a really safe and enjoyable holiday season and a successful start to the new year. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.